Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems that Wargaming's winning streak is not really going to be stopping anytime soon. We had the excellent update with the Wisconsin Dockyard. We've got some much needed changes to CVs, at least in the works for the time being. Johnston's coming soon, Rodney's on the way. With the exception of the Wishing Wharf, it's been a relatively smooth time, for the most part, for Wargaming here recently. And again, the news we're getting today is just adding on to that. We have some changes that are coming to ships that desperately needed these changes, some much needed buffs to several ships in this dev blog, and some much needed nerfs as well to some ships that definitely for sure needed them. So again, this is a dev blog video if you missed that part. If you wish to read the article as I read through it, you can check out the link in the description down below. It'll take you right there to said article. And if you wouldn't mind, while you're down there, dropping a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel helps out for sure on the YouTube side of things. So let's go ahead and get into this dev blog. Dev blog is titled Balance Changes Public Test 13.4. We're applying balance changes to the following ships based on an analysis of both their combat statistics and player feedback: Finyang, Ship Smasher, Siliwangi, Chungmu, Yumahara, Yodo, Vladivostok, Monarch, Annapolis, and Condé. So again, some ships that needed some adjustments one way or another, particularly with the last half of that list. So the Finyang and the Ship Smasher, which is I believe the Warhammer crossover ship, they are receiving a buff. Torpedoes can now also damage cruisers in addition to battleships and aircraft carriers. So instead of just damaging the battleships and the CVs like the Asashio's torpedoes, you can now also hit cruisers. I'm assuming that does mean light and heavy cruisers. So that's another what? Well, really with cruisers, that's another, I would say 50% per match-ish of targets that these torpedoes can now impact rather than just BBs and CVs. And the Siliwangi, which is the tier 8 premium Pan-Asian destroyer, she's getting a gun buff with a buff to her reload from 4.8 to 4.5 seconds, so that's a DPM buff. And again, it may not sound like that much, but I mean, when you're talking about destroyers, that's almost half a second buff to her reload time. When you have a ship like the Siliwangi, which I believe has, 5 guns on it, it does definitely add up. And then next, the Chungmu, which is the Tier 9 Tech Line Pan-Asian Destroyer. That's the Chinese Fletcher. She is getting a bit of a nerf. Her torpedo damage is being reduced from 19,000 to 17,967. But she's also getting another nerf to her speed from 67 to 64. I haven't really played the Pan-Asian destroyers too much, so I can't really testify on how that's affecting the Chungmu, the Siliwangi, and the Finyang, other than obviously the Finyang and the Siliwangi are obviously getting buffs, while the Chungmu's getting quite the nerf there. But the real interesting information comes with the second half of this article. So the Yumahara, which is the Tier 8 Tech Line Japanese battle cruiser. This is the one that if you watch my video on the Japanese battle cruisers, this is the ship that I have the most problems with in the line, but thankfully and honestly quite quickly she's getting buffed. So her sigma is being increased from 2.1 to 2.2. Now we've discussed this in the past, but if you're new here, that's a pretty significant change. The sigma value is the value in the calculation that determines what dispersion pattern essentially you're going to get, or I should say how tight of a dispersion pattern you're going to get. That is the number that indicates whether or not your shells are going to land more in the center of your dispersion ellipse or more on the outside of that dispersion ellipse. And the higher that number is, the more those shells are going to go to the center of your dispersion ellipse, which is obviously where you aim at. If you don't know how aiming works in World of Warships, each of the turrets on your ship, when you fire, they generate a dispersion ellipse, and again, generally where you aim, that's obviously where you want your shells to go. So the higher the number, the better chance those turrets shells go to the center of that dispersion ellipse. So even as small of a buff as a 0.1 bump up in sigma value is a big change, especially to battleships with their large caliber guns, right? Because one shell hitting is the difference sometimes in whether or not you overpin that ship and do 2,300 damage to them, or that one shell pins and finds a citadel, and now you nuke them for the maximum alpha that shell is rated for, which I think with Yamahara is like, what, 13, 12-ish? Oh no, it's really literally right below that, because those are getting a buff too. The AP shells of the Yamahara are getting a damage buff from 12,000 to 12,600, which again on the surface may not sound like that much, but that is per shell. And the Yamahara has 8 shells, so 8 times 12, that's like, you know, again, like 96,000 per salvo. If she does have 8 guns, she might have 5. Again, I haven't played the ship in a while because I don't like it. I did not like it when I grinded through it, so I just kind of parked it after I got done with it. But with another 600 alpha per shell, again, with 8 guns, that is what? Another almost 2,000, or if not 2,000 alpha per salvo. So again, buffs there. And then the penetration is being slightly increased, which is huge. The Japanese battle cruisers, their thing is that, well, they have good penetrations at close range, but at longer ranges, their penetrations aren't that great because that's how they balanced out their guns. Like with the Bongo, you know, she has a high number. She has 10 457mm guns at tier 10, which that's a lot of firepower, right? So the way it's balanced is that closer range, you have better penetration, longer range, you have worse penetration. But with the Yamahara, she only has, I believe, again, 8 guns. So it was really, really underwhelming with her. So I believe these are some much needed buffs to the Yamahara. Now, we don't know how they're buffing the penetration. They could be buffing it by increasing the crup of the shell, which is the rigidity of the shell, or they could be adjusting the air drag coefficient to where at range, you know, it maintains more of its velocity to where, you know, when it hits the target, it's traveling faster, ergo better penetration. I would think they're probably just going to crank the crup up a little bit on the shell, again, or croup, again, however you say it. We'll see exactly what happens when these changes are released, but again, just what we're seeing here, good changes to the Yamahara. All right, and then the Yodo, the tier 10 Techline Japanese light cruiser. Her HE shells are also being buffed as well. Well, I should say her shells are being buffed as well because the Yamahara didn't get any HE shell buffs, but the shells are being buffed. So the maximum damage is being increased from 2,500 to 2,850. So that is a 350 bump per shell, and the Yodo has 15 guns, right? So that's a pretty sizable increase per salvo. And then the fire chance is being increased from 10% to 12%. Again, this is a ship with 15 friggin' guns on it. So, yeah. That's another, 30% fired? Yeah, 30% fire chance per salvo now. That's pretty darn good right there. And the Yodo is a ship that I haven't really had too many problems getting it to work. I do know a lot of players find her lackluster, but I really haven't had too terrible of a time getting the Yodo to, you know, burn things down and use her torpedoes to surprise the enemy team with, your 20 kilometer torps, right? But, you know, any buffs to the Yodo is welcome. For, again, a large part of the community, it seems like she's pretty underwhelming, so changes are welcomed there. And then the Vladivostok, the Tier 8 Techline Soviet battleship. She is getting a little bit of a detection nerf. Her base detectability range is being increased from 15 to 15.4 kilometers. So a very slight nerf there. That's not really going to make or break the ship. I mean, it's a Soviet battleship. Its strength comes from its survivability via its armor and its large HP pool. But, I mean, now you're going to just spot it from slightly further away. But it's not really a huge nerf there, so I don't think it's really going to be too negative for the most part. Again, keep in mind, that's the base range. You could get it down with the commander and the module build to much lower than that. So I think it's going to be fine there. But the big buff that I am so excited for is the Monarch. The Monarch is the Tier 8 Techline British battleship that has for so long been screwed over by just the way that they went about doing her. So if you don't know, the Monarch has the exact same hull as the Tier 7 British battleship, the King George V. The only difference is it has 32mm plating, whereas the King George V has, I believe it's 27mm. So you can't get overmatched like you would be able to if you had, a King George the V at Tier 8. But because of that, it still has the Tier 7 hit pool, which is not really great at Tier 8. So she's quite squishy, and she can get farmed down fairly easily. But finally, after all these years, they are finally giving her the Specialized Repair Team's consumable, which, according to the DevBlog, has similar parameters to those found on the next ships of the branch. So I'm assuming it means it has the ability to print herself a new ship, which is a massive, massive buff to the Monarch. Up until, well, and still right now in game, she has just a normal heal. So you get just murdered so easily by, all the high tier HE spammy ships, the carriers and such, because again, you have a Tier 7 battleship hull with the exclusion of the, the slight buffs to the armor thickness at Tier 8. And the ship also, I think its damage output is fine, because she has 9 15-inch guns with a good reload time with improved British BBHG. It's not as good as the previous ship in the class, which is the King George V, but again, she does have 9 guns and a faster reload time than the King George V. So I think the damage output was fine. Her survivability was what was bugging me about the Monarch, and now friggin' 5-6 years after the British BB line has been introduced, they're finally doing what they should have done with her all those years ago. So I'm super excited for that. I cannot wait for that buff to come out and see all the Monarchs in game finally. All right, one of the last changes is the Annapolis. She's getting nerfed. Her HP is being reduced from 56,000 to 51,900. So that's what, a 4,100 HP drop. And the Annapolis is kind of the sleeper super ship because she's not really flashy like a lot of the other super ships. She's a Des Moines with another turret on her, but like it's a Des Moines with another turret on her, right? So that's a crazy amount of DPM that you can put out if you've played clan battles or anything competitive where super ships are allowed. It's not uncommon to see Annapolises on the other side. But perhaps the even bigger nerf is the Conde nerf. Her HP is being reduced from 63,000 to 55,400. That's what, a 7,600 HP drop. That is a huge nerf to Conde. And after being tormented by Condes for the better part of like 2 clan battle seasons, I'm not exactly going to lose any sleep over those changes. Conde's an incredibly annoying ship when played correctly, and I do think it was fairly warranted. Again, we'll see. These are just announced changes. They can change during testing, right? But I do think the Annapolis and the Conde were due a little bit of a nerf bat. They were incredibly popular again in clan battles and other competitive modes when super ships were allowed for very good reasons. They're very, very good at doing what they do, and perhaps a little bit too good, as we see here. So guys, those are the changes coming to the public test in 13.4. Again, we'll see how many of these stick. I'm super excited for the Monarch changes. Long overdue. Yumahara, I might actually be able to force myself to play her again once these changes come out. Those are the ones I'm excited for. Let me know what you guys are excited for in the comments down below. And do you think these changes are warranted or unwarranted? Again, share all that down below in the comment section. Hope you guys have a wonderful Thursday, wonderful rest of your week. Hope to catch you guys in the next one.